But we want to jump right in here to our first guest who's been patiently waiting and is far in the future, our time, not Ranya's time. That is Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, who is the national spokesperson for the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa, or NUMSA, as it's known by its acronym, back with us to discuss South Africa and everything happening regarding the Palestinian issue. Pax, as always, thank you so much for being back with us.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure.
No, the pleasure is all ours to have you here with us. And of course, I think, many people know South Africa plays a big role in a lot of foreign policy issues around the world. Palestine is no different whatsoever. So, talk to us, if you could, maybe in our first question here about, what is actually the stance of the South African government? What's going on in the politics there? And how have they been intervening or discussing the issue vis-a-vis what should come next?
So for me, really, this is a very interesting period in history. I think this is a moment that most of us are going to remember for the rest of our lives, particularly because what we are witnessing is full-on genocide. And it's genocide with cameras rolling. It's playing itself out on social media platforms. Everywhere if you're on any kind of platform, there's no way that you can ignore it. It's in your face. And I think it's really important for progressive organizations to take a strong stance and to call it what it is, and to not participate in apartheid Israel's propaganda of trying to cover up the mass murder of innocent Palestinian women and children. And more recently, the South African government has taken a position to recall its diplomats from Israel. This also follows a vote that South Africa led in the United Nations a couple of days ago in the General Assembly, where they called for an immediate ceasefire, which unfortunately was ignored. South Africa has also called for a UN peacekeeping force to be placed in Palestine in defense of innocent women and children. And I think when you look at all the sequence of all of these events that I'm describing to you, most of which have happened in the last week or two, that clearly shows what the foreign policy position of the state is, which is that they very clearly define this as genocide. The Minister of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, Minister Naledi Pandor, was in Parliament, and she did not mince her words. She called it genocide. She demanded an immediate ceasefire. She called for humanitarian corridors to be enabled so that, women and children and all of those who are affected by this relentless bombing by apartheid Israel can actually receive assistance. And this is a position that, as NUMSA, we wholeheartedly support. We believe that we cannot, just sit back and watch this horror that's happening play itself out. So I think it is definitely a progressive step by the government. Of course, there were some criticisms from opposition movements, others saying that the South African government should have taken a far stronger stance, should have expelled the Israeli ambassador. And as NUMSA, of course, we would definitely support that. But just the fact that a decision was taken to recall the ambassador, we also feel that that is progressive. And the fact that we have a minister in foreign policy who's very ideologically clear on the issue of Palestine is, for us, something that is very important. And this is why we feel that, the decisions that the state has taken in this regard deserve our support.
I'm curious, the fact that South Africa has quite a history with Israel, and not a good one, in terms of Israel's support for the apartheid government in South Africa, as in actual material support, like militarily supporting them. And South Africa and its leaders have been very vocal over the decades about calling what's happening in Israel-Palestine apartheid. In fact, it's been one of the most vocal countries in the world on this issue. I'm curious if you could speak to some of that history and how it contributes to the sentiment that many South Africans have today towards this issue?
Yeah, so I think anywhere in the world where people have experienced colonialism or have experienced apartheid the way South Africa has, there's no way that you can look at what's happening in Palestine and not be affected. There's no way that you can analyze the situation and not come to the conclusion that many organizations, including Amnesty International, have come to, which is that Israel is an apartheid state in every sense of the word. What you see playing itself out in Gaza, on the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in all the territories where Israel, as an occupying force, is controlling Palestinian people, is literally a situation like what happened in South Africa during the dark days of apartheid, where you had a systematic system of oppression which was legislated by the state, where the state basically said that Black people who were born in the land of their birth were not citizens of this country, did not deserve, they were stripped of land, they were stripped of land ownership rights, they did not have the same political rights as white people, they did not have the right to vote, for example, and they were massacred on a grand scale by the apartheid government. And the massacre took various forms. There was deliberate and obvious massacres that we saw through, if you look at history, you look at attacks like what happened during June 16, where young people were slaughtered by the apartheid government for protesting against the horrors of apartheid. You had other, incidents of slaughter during the protests against the pass system. The pass was, or the Dom pass, which is what we called it, was basically an ID, a form of identification, which was reserved strictly for Black people. It controlled where they lived, it controlled where they worked, it even controlled where they could be buried and where they died. And so when you look at that level of control, the fact that the apartheid government controlled the movements of Black people, that it stripped them of their dignity, it stole their land, that it massacred them, that it denied them quality education, it denied them health care. All of these things are exactly the same situation and circumstances facing the people of Palestine. Israel has created in Gaza what has been described as the largest open air prison. They've even built walls. They control the movement of Palestinian people. As we speak right now, people in Palestine have no access to water, electricity, communication services have been majorly interrupted. For decades, land has been stolen from people in Palestine because Israel has been unlawfully occupying Palestinian territories. Palestinian people do not have the same political rights as Israeli, not even seen as human. If you've been listening to the language of some of the members of the Israeli Defense Force and even Netanyahu himself describing Palestinians as human animals. Human animals. When somebody categorizes you as an animal, they are stripping you of your humanity. They are justifying the brutality that they inflict upon you. They are saying that you are not equal to them and therefore are undeserving to be treated with, the rights that all human beings deserve. That is the same situation as Black people under apartheid. So for anybody to try and pretend that what Israel is doing is normal or is justifiable by any stretch of the imagination, they're just really participating in Israeli false propaganda. They are participating in the oppression of an entire group of people. They are justifying brutality and violence, and they should be condemned because that is exactly what you are. And when you also look at, for example, the position that you had for example, people like Nelson Mandela, people like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who for years condemned Israel, condemned the way Israel was treating Palestinians, who they were consistent about calling for the freedom of the Palestinian people in the true sense of the word. that is something that South Africa thankfully carries on even today as part of its foreign policy, engagement, and it's I think for me personally as a South African, I feel very grateful for the fact that our our government has taken a position and has not deviated on this issue specifically, because there have been a lot of capitulations that we've seen of countries that are supposed to be progressive, leaders in the world that we are supposed to be progressive who've sided with Israel. But I think the position that the South African government has taken on this really has been very clear, and it's very much a reflection of the struggles that we ourselves fought when we were trying to end the cruel apartheid system in this country.
Well, Pax, real quick before we let you go, I also want to ask you this. We had you on a couple months ago to talk about the double standards at how the ICC, the International Criminal Court, has been used. I know South Africa has called on the ICC to investigate Israel. We saw how quick they were to jump on Russia. Obviously we don't know what they'll do vis-a-vis Israel, Palestine, but is this potentially another point where, the hypocrisy of the West could be at play?
Oh, yes. I mean, the very fact that there are people who think that, for example, in South Africa, some of the opposition parties, the right wingers, of course, predominantly white organizations led by the Democratic Alliance, were very critical of our position. They don't like the fact that Naledi Pandor was very direct about calling Benjamin Netanyahu a war criminal, and that there should be a warrant of arrest issued. And we saw these calls, I mean, in the South African media, where there's a dominance of the narrative of the neoliberals, that's the message that was consistently being carried. So, we should not critique the state for seeing similarities here. Here we've got a very clear-cut case of gross violations of human rights, where Israeli officials have basically said that they want to wipe out Palestinian people, that they see this as an opportunity to clear the land so that they can fully occupy the land that was stolen from Palestinian people. And so the daily bombings and the fact that you've had, at this point now, more than 10,000 people massacred, more than 4,000 of that are children, tells you that we are here dealing with a rogue state. We are dealing with an apartheid state. Benjamin Netanyahu should be in handcuffs. Really, we are watching this man commit war crimes, and not enough really is being done. And so one of the things that and we've actually been having conversations about this even within the movement, within NUMSA, that the progressive working class has to play a really pivotal role in mobilizing, not just on the streets, but in all manner, whether it's through educational programs, etc. Because it's very important that we ensure that we play our role in defending Palestine and in putting pressure on our governments and in governments elsewhere to do the right thing and to take action against apartheid Israel.
Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, the national spokesperson for the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa, or NUMSA, largest trade union in South Africa, I might add. As always, honored to have you on, and thank you for making some time for us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having me.